Hello, my name is Peter Doherty. I'm a Catholic priest and a psychologist with a particular interest in the relationship between psychology and spirituality. Although these disciplines have often been regarded with some suspicion, they are in fact deeply complementary. Sound psychological insight can strengthen our spiritual life, while authentic spirituality can deepen meaning, resilience, and daily functioning. This podcast offers a weekly reflection on the Gospel reading for the coming Sunday. It is intended as a resource for those preparing homilies, as well as for anyone who teaches, studies, or simply wishes to engage more deeply with Scripture. Drawing on psychological research, biblical scholarship, and anthropological perspectives, I aim to make the Gospel both accessible and relevant in today's world. I approach Scripture not only as a source of faith, but also as a guide to human development, recognizing that biblical authors wrote with a worldview very different from our own, yet one that offers profound insight into identity, suffering, and hope. Today's reflection is based on Matthew chapter 13, verse 24 to 43, which will be proclaimed in churches on July the 19th, 2026. In this passage, Jesus presents three parables that illuminate God's plan for creation. The first is the parable of the wheat and the weeds. A farmer's field is deliberately sown with weeds by an enemy. When the plants begin to grow, the laborers offer to remove the weeds, but the landowner declines, recognizing that in doing so, they may also uproot the good wheat. At a practical level, many who garden will recognize the risk of pulling out healthy plants along with the weeds. At a deeper level, Jesus is speaking about the coexistence of good and evil and the necessity of discernment. Human beings are not simply passive actors. We are moral people, capable of choice. Without alternatives, there could be no true choosing, only compliance. In psychological terms, we sometimes see individuals who attempt to avoid responsibility, appealing to an external authority. I was just following orders, or I just work here. Such responses reflect a distancing from personal accountability and responsibility. This parable challenges that stance. It reminds us that we are responsible for our actions, and that growth, both spiritual and psychological, requires the willingness to own our choices. At the same time, the distinction between good and evil is not always immediately clear. History shows that individuals and groups can rationalize harmful actions and convince themselves they are acting for the greater good. This ambiguity calls for humility and ongoing reflection. Fear can also be used to rationalize harmful actions and make them appear good. It's also noteworthy that while Jesus explains this first parable, he does not provide explicit interpretations for the two that follow. Both begin with the phrase, "The kingdom of heaven is like," but their meaning is left open. This invites the listener into a more reflective process of interpretation, one that may deepen with spiritual maturity and life experience. The second parable, that of the mustard seed, emphasizes the contrast between small beginnings and significant outcomes. While the mustard seed may not be the smallest seed by modern scientific standards, in its original cultural context, it functioned as a familiar image of tininess. The point is not botanical precision, but transformation. This parable offers encouragement. What may seem like a small or insignificant action can have far-reaching consequences. It speaks to a God who works through even the smallest human contribution, bringing about outcomes beyond our immediate vision. This theme is echoed in the feeding of the 5,000, where a modest offering, 5 loaves and 2 fish, becomes the means through which abundance is revealed. We see this in Matthew chapter 14, verse 13 to 21, and John chapter 6, verse 1 to 14. In this sense, we participate in God's creative work. Unfortunately, we might not be aware of the results of our good work. We sow, but may not be around for the harvest. I invite my listeners to reflect on people who have helped you in your life. Do they know how important their words or actions have been to you? My point here is that even small acts of kindness or timely words of encouragement can have a positive impact, days, weeks, or even years later. Sadly, the same dynamics happen with evil. Many people who do evil have they themselves been victim of evil actions. In my work with dysfunctional families, I have often seen patterns of dysfunctional behavior passed down from previous generations. The third parable, that of the leaven, shifts the focus from visible growth to hidden transformation. Leaven works quietly within the dough, bringing about change at a fundamental level. While people in Jesus' time may not have understood the biological mechanisms involved, they recognize its transformative power. Here, the kingdom of heaven is presented not as a place, but more clearly as a dynamic process, one that unfolds from within the person. This suggests that creation itself is ongoing, and that we, as part of that creation, are continually being formed and transformed. The invitation, then, is to develop the eyes to see and the ears to hear this process at work in our lives and in the world around us. Be encouraged by the transformation. You are maturing spiritually. Thank you for joining me. If you find this podcast helpful, I invite you to join me each week. I also welcome your questions, reflections, and I encourage you to share the podcast with others who may benefit. If you are listening on YouTube, you can support the podcast by subscribing and leaving a review. I would also be interested in knowing where you are listening from. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome my listeners from Singapore. Thank you for joining us. Next Sunday, July the 26th, we will reflect on Matthew chapter 13, verse 44 to 52, where Jesus continues to describe the kingdom of heaven through parables, focusing on the transformative impact of encountering this change. New episodes are released every Sunday, focusing on the upcoming gospel. Special thanks to Heather Patel-Doherty and Richard Colomb for their continued support. May God bless you all.